All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Digging Deeper, our weekly podcast here at Rise City that looks more deeply into the Sunday sermons, messages, or anything else going on in the life of the church. We are here, me and Pastor Bobby today. Yesterday, you were in week number 2, kind of week number 3 of really just vision and values, of moving in a new direction, of where's the church headed. And so there's new vision statement, new set of value statements. And starting last week, you began to kind of walk through each of those. Last week was people are the mission and growth is our pursuit. And then yesterday looked at the idea of these two ideas of serving and generosity, that serving is our calling, generosity is our culture. I knew it. I just wanted to make sure you knew it.
Yeah, double checking.
Sometimes the second word trips me up, but I know all the first words really, really well. So before we get into that, there was one thing that you said that brought back some thoughts for me. I'm a little bit older than you, like 4 years or so. Yeah. So when you were in high school, I was in college. But even though you were in high school when I was in college, there was one thing that we had in common, which was I remember an obscene amount of my life was consumed by playing GoldenEye on N64. Like, yes. When I think back on it, I have two thoughts. One is those were the great golden years, no pun intended. Number two, I used to complain when I was in college that I didn't have enough time to get stuff done. And I just want to go back in time and slap myself because I played GoldenEye like 8 hours a day, every day.
Well, the priorities, you had to do that. And then the other things also had to get done, but you didn't have enough time. When you played GoldenEye and it was like, 4v4, you all hooked up to one system. Yeah. We used to get mad because if you were looking at someone else's screen, and so that was the thing. It's like, bro, you can't snipe me from there. You've been looking at my screen. That was always
For those who are more elderly than us or younger than us, GoldenEye was the first multiplayer first-person shooter game, which those are everywhere now, like Call of Duty, Halo. But GoldenEye was the first one that you could play with your friends. You could all hook up together and play against each other.
James Bond. You look like you were Pierce Brosnan out there.
Oh, dude. And GoldenEye was a good movie, too, when I was 18. I think if I watched it now, I'd be like, what is this?
Don't watch it now. But back then, it had to be great. I remember it being great.
Similarly, playing GoldenEye now is very disappointing. You're like, what is this? It's really depressing. I walk in to my living room and my son is playing Fortnite on whatever PlayStation. And I just look at it and I'm like, I don't even... Whatever.
I had someone come to me yesterday afterwards, and they got their kid a Nintendo 64 with Star Fox recently for their birthday.
That game was hard.
Yeah, that game was.
I never could get good at that game. I gave up, I think, and went back and played GoldenEye again.
Of course.
So yeah, I thought we could just have a whole long conversation about why video games are evil.
Perfect.
You can say when I got married, though, I used to play, I was single for a lot of my 20s. So I don't know. I had the PS whatever and the Xbox. And when I got married, my wife says, I will not be married to someone who plays video games. And I was like, so we're going to have a conversation about this or no? No, so I
so late at night, 2 a.m., you're up playing video games.
No, I sold them. I got rid of them. And,
got rid of them.
Never had them in our house again until Kellen was old enough. But I do now just play Block Blast on my phone, and she can't stop me doing that. So, also wasting my life, though. Like I'm wasting this podcast. All right, let's dive in. 2 values we looked at, and you kind of did something similar last week, which was you covered 2 last week, but you also spent a majority of the time on the first one, people at the mission, and then kind of spent a little bit of time on growth. This week was a lot of time on generosity, a little bit less time on serving. Maybe just like a behind the scenes question. Was that for you just the way it worked out? Or were you like, actually, I think because money's so sensitive, I should give this more time? Like, how did you, when you were writing your message, how did you approach that?
Yeah, I would say it was probably a little bit of both of those. One, I feel like I haven't talked really much about money at all since coming here. So I thought it's probably wise to at least set some framework of the way I would think about it, the way I feel like the Bible views it and that conversation. I've had a couple talks around it, but nothing of that magnitude. So I wanted to spend time on that. And then when I started writing, I had a whole plan. So my plan was, this is the way I write a message. I do like a sort of like a mind map ahead of time. It's all in my mind. I don't write anything down, but it's this idea of like, okay, here's the scripture I'm going to use, and then here's the journey of the message. And so I knew in the journey of my message, I wanted to go, okay, we're responding to God's generosity. We're responding to God doing for us. And then I wanted to talk about money and heart because they're so interconnected. So I felt like that was the next jumping point. And then I was going to land at that end around the idea around serving and response. But as I wrote the message, I quickly realized I was out of time. I was probably out of time before I even got to the last point, the idea around serving. But I set the schedule ahead of time, saying that I'll have 5 weeks between Vision Sunday and then Vision Message, Value 1, 2, Value 3, 4, Value 5. So with the 5 weeks I set aside, I felt like, you know what? If they connect, and that's why I went back. When I went back to it, I'm like, okay, so the idea of serving and generosity are connected. So you could apply the heart of it to both of those. And so that's the route I took. Probably could have spent more time on. I probably could have done a 7-week-long series on the vision values.
Yeah, they're all really big topics.
Yeah.
This is a question I have. Most people might ask this question. You map it out, but you don't write any of that down. Like, aren't you afraid like you'll forget your idea? You don't even like take notes on your phone or anything. You just
if I really, really like think of an idea while I'm driving down the road or while I'm sitting at my desk or something like that, that I'm like, this is brilliant. I'll sometimes jot that down. I almost live in this world of like, if I'm mapping through this in my head and I'm thinking about it and I can't remember it the next day, it may not have been as good as I thought it was. And it may not have been something that like just naturally comes out of it. It may have been a stretch. So I spend time reading commentaries. I spend time doing a lot of stuff like that. But ultimately, I like to think really heavily on the message ahead of time. So when I write my notes, it's almost like that. I'll do a brain dump sometimes ahead of time. But when I write my final notes, it's just, this is sort of the natural progression of the way it comes, which is why I have the ability to probably preach with less notes, like relying on them from platform because the way I've mapped it out in my head. It's so weird. I don't know that.
No, it makes sense. Yeah. Do you ever have that thing where you're like laying in bed at night and you just have the most brilliant idea ever, and maybe you like take a note on your phone and you wake up the next morning and read it and like, it's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
I only take brilliant idea notes. I don't take the bad. No. Yeah, I have definitely went to sleep thinking about an idea that I thought was brilliant and woke up thinking about that same idea and realized within just a few moments, it's not that brilliant.
It's not that brilliant at all.
It's not the route it should go.
Yeah. Sometimes late at night, I'll be like, my ideas will seem so much grander and more amazing. And then in the daytime, I'm like, that was pretty stupid. I don't even know where I got that. Where do most of your best ideas come from? Like driving, reading, shower, like where? Like,
so I need something to occupy a space in my mind. So honestly, like driving or doing some kind of like mindless task that is, I shouldn't say driving is a mindless task.
It kind of is, though.
But it kind of is. Like anything that like just occupies that secondary space that eliminates a lot of the distractions. So like if I'm sitting on the couch, I can easily pick up the phone. I can get distracted by, whatever, by block blast or scrolling or something like that. And so any space that puts me in a situation where there's a little bit of freedom. Sometimes I really like sitting at a coffee shop because, again, there's enough noise going around where it feels like there's like, that sort of like white noise in the background is sort of like taking up that space and I can just focus in. So usually that, not typically like the typical, like, I get great ideas in the shower. I get great ideas like early in the morning when I wake up, I go pull away. I actually don't do well scheduling the time and then it being creative. I've often said it like this. It's probably connected to my personality. I think I read this on a personality profile one time, but I work in like spurts of energy regarding my creativity. So it's not like consistent throughout the day. There's times of the day where I know I'm going to be more creative and times where I'm going to be less.
Yeah.
And so, and if I have too much admin work, I always want to clear it out of my head beforehand, which always messes me up. So if I have to clear a bunch of emails and do a bunch of stuff like that, by the time I'm done all that, I'm like exhausted, which is so dumb. Some people think I'm ridiculous right now, but I'm exhausted. So then all my creativity and the consideration for writing. So a little bit of everything, I guess, but
makes sense. That's always been a challenge for me. And everyone's different, but there are some things that feel a little more common and some things feel less common. And there's a book by Carey Nieuwhof that talks about, I think it's called At Your Best. He talks about like the green and red and yellow zones of your day. And most leaders, their green zone is the morning. And it's just absolutely red for me. I'm at my most creative like around 4 p.m., which is like hard because nobody else is. So like I want to plan like creative meetings at like 5 o'clock in the afternoon. My kids are home. I can't. So like
Julie's like, why are you still at the office?
If I could build my own schedule and no one else was involved, it'd be like 10 to 7.
Oh wow.
But you can't build that way. So a lot of times though, my most creative like late afternoon. Sitting in the office is usually quieter because everyone else is tired going home. I'm like, this is when I can really think and write and stuff. But so specifically in your message, then you talked about generosity, and it was like you mentioned, the focus was on the heart, the giving. So there are a couple things. The first was this: in first service, I wasn't in second service. You made this like fun comment where you said, there are only 2 places where Jesus talks about how much to give. And both places you quoted were a person giving everything. What was interesting though for me is I was kind of waiting to see where you were going to go with that. And you kind of shifted, but you did say, now I'm not saying that Jesus is saying to give everything. And you kind of moved more into like the idea of the heart. So like, I just want to clarify and give you a chance to make sure, like if anyone else was like, you weren't saying Jesus is literally saying everybody has to literally give everything, but you were saying there's something here. There's something powerful about the fact that these are the 2 places that Jesus talks about, and he's asking for a lot, right? Like, where were you thinking, like, how would that play out for you?
The idea of it was twofold. One, I wanted to specify that there was an amount that Jesus talked about, because it's such a like normal sort of like, we feel good when we tell people, oh, well, the amount doesn't matter. And it's like, well, I don't think that's actually accurate. I think the amount does matter. So it's not just like throw peanuts at Jesus and he's going to be like, yay, that's great. Like there was an amount connected to it. And then the truth is, like, if you look into the New Testament, Jesus pretty much asks for everything. Like for your whole life, lay down your own life, lay down your own desires. So like when it comes to money, like when it comes to like general giving, obviously Jesus is fine. We own houses and we take care of things, all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to money, it's the only thing that the Christian go, oh, well, I'm giving 10% and I'm using the rest for his glory, or I'm giving this amount. And so, I don't think that there is a scriptural New Testament commandment that you have to give everything. But I do think that if Jesus said, give everything, how do you respond to that? Like, do you listen to him if he says, do you trust him with everything?
Which is the heart you're looking to. Yeah. So if not every person is required to give literally everything, but yet there is this place, and it's definitely like I don't know, it's a controversial issue, and not one like, it's not, the point of this isn't like having debate stuff. It's just more like there is this sense of like this thing called the tithe, which the word tithe is a tenth. It's different. It's an old English word for tenth, going all the way back to the ancient world of giving a tenth of what you have to your king. And as a Christian, Jesus is my king, right? He's in charge. And I loved how you talked about how, not so much like, hey, let's really argue about Old Testament, New Testament stuff, but the idea that if your heart is in something, you'll give to it. And I think that's the piece that, how did you say it? You made a comment. I don't want to quote you verbatim, but it was something to the effect of like, if you don't really care about church, you're probably not someone that gives
I did
church.
make, I think I only made that one in the 9. It just came to me randomly.
What did you say?
I was like, something to the effect, because it wasn't in my notes, but it was something to the effect of if you're like, yeah, I'm really not connected at church. I don't know. It's not really that big of a deal. More than likely, you're probably not giving.
Yeah.
Like, more than likely. I mean, and it sounds like it could be like harsh. I think Megan was like in the side over there, and I was like, oh, was that? I didn't mean it to be harsh.
I didn't see it was harsh at all. I was like,
but
yeah.
it's it's like real life usually. When you're, and that's that scripture. It's like where your money is, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Like
Sure.
what you're invested into, what you believe in, your heart naturally gravitates towards those things.
So here's why I bring it up. And this is just sort of a, set it on the tee, let you hit it where you want to hit it. One of the biggest questions that Christians often have when it comes to the idea of being a giver, being a tithe, those kind of things, is like, okay, I trust that whether it's 10% or whatever, I trust that God is telling me in Scripture that He wants me to be generous with my money and give. Mm-hmm. But why do I have to give it to a church? Why can't I just give it all to Compassion International or the homeless person on the side of the street?
Yeah.
So like if someone says like, well, Bobby, I do give, but I just don't give to the church. I guess like I'm a random person sitting here saying that to you. Well, Bobby, I do give money. I just don't give it to the church.
Yeah.
How do you respond to that person?
I think I would say, first, I would say, good on you that you're generous to the world, that you're generous to the homeless guy or Compassion International or whatever organization that's doing something in the name of Jesus. I think those are worthy, noble, and good endeavors to do. I don't think we do those, though, in sacrificing giving to the church. The church is God's plan. It's His idea. Men have the opportunity, we have the opportunity as people to sort of like to run with it and lead it and, navigate it. So is the church perfect? No, because there's a bunch of us involved with it. But the goal is that the church is like God's vehicle to bring His message to the world. Mm-hmm. And so to neglect being generous towards the church, I think is a significant lapse in probably heart and understanding of what the church is designed to do. The second thing I would say to it is just from an Old Testament perspective. I think about the book of Nehemiah. Interestingly enough, so Nehemiah comes, the story. He rebuilds the walls and they're setting everything back up. And then he leaves and he goes back because he has to go back. And then he comes back and he finds all the Levites, all the people that are supposed to be like working in the temple and doing the work of God are back in their fields again. And he's like, what's going on? Well, people stopped giving. And then the work of the Lord slowed down because in order for the Levites to sustain life, they had to work their own field. So they had to neglect the house of God to go do something else. And the reality is, and it might sound weird because, like we are beneficiaries in a way of people's tithe. Sure. Our income comes because people tithe. I tithe, you tithe, but like the income comes from that. But the reality of Scripture is that's part of the design of it, is that Paul said it, how did he, you might be able to quote it exactly, the worker's worthy of his wage. Yeah. Paul established that, hey, aren't I? And there was a season when Paul worked on tents and he did not take anything, but that was a short season. And he had other seasons where he received an income from preaching the gospel. And I think that's part of it too. Like we have a church staff of people who work really hard and do everything they can. And that's part of it. And so when we look at the tithe, it's not just from a very practical standpoint. It allows the church, God's idea, to continue to move forward and make an impact around the world. And so, I would say do that, but not while neglecting the other. It's like, if you're like, oh man, I really spend a lot of time with my kids and I love them and I take my daughter on daddy-daughter dates, and I go to all my boys' sports games. And I love my wife, but I don't spend time with her. I spend time with my kids. That's where I invest my time. It would be like, well, that's not wise. Why are you picking? It's not a pick one over the other. It's a both. And I think that's sort of the same situation.
Yeah.
Also, in giving, the beauty of it in the church is, if I wanted to write a check for East County Transitional Living for their water heater, personally, I couldn't do it. I don't have that much money sitting in my bank account that just easily expendable. But when the church comes together and we have resources that are available, we're able to respond quickly to large initiatives. And that's part of it as well. And so it's not just that everything the church receives stays internal. A lot of it, 25% of everything we receive goes out. And I think that's part of it too, is to know that there is this bigger picture of the church's impact in our region and the world.
Yeah. I've wrestled a lot with the concept of, we have these words that seem to live in the same bubble, and they're generosity, tithe, tax. All of those words exist in the Old Testament. And so if you were to go back in time and talk to a person living in whatever second century BC, Palestine, and you talk to them about offerings, tithing, taxing, being generous, I find it so interesting, and I don't have a good answer for this, like how blurry some of those concepts would be.
Sure.
Because they paid a temple tax. It wasn't generosity in the sense of how you and I often think of generosity, which is like just giving out of the goodness of your heart. But even like you quoted in Matthew when it says, how the Gentiles do it, their benefactors lord it over. A benefactor was somebody who gave to people in need in exchange for services or good. That was the concept of grace, was I'll give to you a gift, but I want something in return. A temple tax was not generosity purely. It was like, no, we're supporting the work of the temple here.
Yeah.
And a tithe was specifically given to like, this is feeding the priests. This is when there are people in need, it goes to them. So it was very specific. But then it's like, but also if you want to just give an offering, here are ways to do it. And all of this stuff existed together. And for us, I think in America, it's hard because we don't have a temple. We are the temple. But we do still have the work of the church. We also have a government that is taxing us. And we don't want to confuse those two ideas. But sometimes those ideas aren't as far apart as we might be more uncomfortable with how close they actually are than we want to talk about.
Sure.
Because what I hate about taxes is that I don't always trust the way my government is spending the money. I don't hate the concept of taxes. I just drove my daughter to school on a well-paved road that somebody else built and takes care of because I pay taxes. I have police I can call. I have a whole structural system around me that makes my life better, that I utilize, that my taxes go to. And I think a Jewish person would have had similar thoughts when they gave this money to the temple, of saying like, me and my community are getting something out of this. We're investing in, because this is part of our community. But there's no part of me that would ever think of tax as generosity.
Yeah.
I think of it as, the government stealing money from me. But it's interesting. I sometimes I wrestle with that idea of like, God saying like, hey, I'm calling you to be generous, but I also want you to understand you're giving to something that is a corporate good that even you yourself are participating in. And, I get like 7 or 8 text messages every Sunday morning, back and forth. Hey, it's too hot in here. It's too cold in here. It's too hot in here. It's too cold. So I'm like raising and lowering the AC units at like every 10 minutes. Somebody like, it's too hot in here. I lower down. It's too cold in here. And I'm fine with that. It's my job. But like, I can raise and lower those numbers because people choose to give to the church.
Yeah.
And they can sit comfortably and listen to you preach in a nice chair in a warm environment or a cold environment, whichever, because we are choosing to take part in this and give. And it shows our heart is here because we want to be a part of it, which I think is such like the tie into your idea of like, where your heart is like, is your heart with this? Are you part of this community? I think giving and tithing is just a natural outflow of that. Yeah. But I don't know. It's always a weird tension sometimes.
Yeah, no, I think it's unique because there's similarities. I'm
not saying they're the same.
Yeah, it's unique. There's just similarities. Like there's similarities in the outworking of it. I think the heart position of it is the part that's so important. Like for me, like when I tithe, when I give, I mean, I've automated it. It comes out every paycheck comes out automated. I think about it. I feel it. I've when I was making, like, my wife and I were making $600 a month, and we had a house to stay in. So that was our $600 a month, and we stayed in the house. Our tithe was $60 a month. Stellar. I felt it. I feel it now. And I remember I've had people ask me before, like family members, how do you afford to live like that? And I think to myself, well, there's things that I don't partake in that maybe someone else could if they didn't choose to do this, but I don't think my life's worse off because of it. Like in the early days, I was like, well, I don't drink, and, $60 a month probably isn't an absurd amount of money to spend on alcohol. So there you go. I saved money there. I don't know. There's things that we had to sacrifice. There was, like, we take smaller vacations or no vacation, or we drive to a beach for a day kind of stuff. Yeah. Where, certain sacrifices in life.
You drink Folgers coffee. No, you're not going that far.
Not going that far. I used to drink Folgers coffee, Black Label, but not anymore. Brian Seeger does, though. Shout out Brian Seeger. You're probably not listening, but your daughter is. Harper is. So, he drinks Folgers. But I'm like, let's spend a little more money on coffee than that. This past weekend, Dave Bennett, he's been telling me to go to a coffee shop. He wanted me to try it. It's down close to Spring Valley. And he walks in on Sunday with one. He goes, you might want to warm this up, though. It's been here since 6 o'clock. But I picked it up for you. And I was like, cool. That's nice of you, man.
Dave's one of our drummers.
Yeah. So,
and also somebody that has saved me thousands and thousands of dollars fixing my car.
Well, he saved me $6.50 on Sunday by handing me a beautiful latte. And it was delicious. Shout out, Dave. That's but good. So what were we saying? The idea that sometimes it's prioritizing. I sacrifice something in my life because I'm choosing to give these resources, or to, some people say pay your tithe, give the tithe, bring the tithe. Is probably the most common Old Testament vernacular, is you bring all the tithe to the storehouse. Mm-hmm. And so when I do that, there's sacrifices, but my life's not worse off. My life is better off, I believe, because of it. To have my family in church, in a church community that is alive and vibrant, and to be a part of a community that builds homes in Mexico and helps local stuff and sees people give their life to the Lord. All of that is worthy endeavor to bring resources to.
So let's spend just the last couple minutes together touching on what I think might be the root here for a lot of people. When you say all those things are worthy, when I made a comment about taxes, I don't think I'm alone in saying the average person, the average thoughtful, normal thinking person understands that taxes are fine. The problem so many of us have is we don't trust our government to spend it well. Mm. We think they spend it on stupid things, or they just waste it, or whatever.
Yeah.
And we live in an era where, you have shows like The Righteous Gemstones, which I haven't seen because I'm a good Christian.
Yeah, I haven't either, but I've heard stories.
I've heard a lot of stories. I actually haven't watched it, but not because I'm a good Christian. That stuff just bugs me. But there is so much out there to make people think that we're not trustworthy with their money. Mm-hmm. And I understand that. Like that's hard for me sometimes to get over, because I had to deal with it myself. Like, what would you say to someone that says, Bobby, I want to be generous. I do believe that God's telling me to give to the church. It's just so hard for me because I don't know that I can trust you guys with my money. Like, What would you say to that?
Yeah. A couple things. When I was at a church long time ago, and some things went down. And when I left, I was trying to decide, do I hold on to the 4-week severance that I have and give my tithe at wherever I land, or do I let my tithe stay there?
With the church you were leaving?
The church I was leaving.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
That's probably a chunk of money, a whole month's severance.
Yeah, it was a whole month's severance. I mean, it was a chunk of money for me then, but it was a very small salary. That's not the point, though. The point is I was trying to decide. And someone, a friend of mine said, yeah, at this point, you're not landing anywhere. Maybe the thing is just to trust God with it. Now, this is personal, anecdotal sort of story. Maybe your point is not, do you trust the church with it, whatever? Do you trust God with it? Leave well. Let it. Don't overthink it. Trust God in it, because even if someone else does wrong, this is between you and God more than it's between you and a person. And God has a way of working those things out. So that's thing one, I would say. That doesn't help, because that just like, okay, cool. That validates that maybe there's little trust equity developed. When it comes to that side of it, though, you're like, hey, I'm planning a church. I want to be here, and I want to know I can trust the church with resources. I think you just begin to ask questions to the right people. What I mean by the right people is, like, if you randomly talk to your neighbor, I don't know if I can trust the church. Well, your neighbor may not trust the church either, and they have no understanding. As a church, we're pretty transparent with our money. We have a lot of checks and balances. We have an eldership that review monthly all of our money that comes in monthly. Our staff have accountability things built in, and all of that stuff is transparent enough to where the accountability structure is in place. But again, I don't know, maybe it's just me, maybe it's the way I grew up. I think it's less of a trust of the church issue and more of a trust of the God issue than it is. Like, it's a blurred line, but I wonder if sometimes it's, I don't know if I can trust the church, is really just like the outworking of I don't know if I can trust God with giving this, because life is tough and money is tight. Yeah. So I think those two things are actually more connected than probably we would say. And so I think you should address the church side by having the right conversations. And you should address the trusting God side by learning to trust the Lord. Read through some scriptures of how you could trust the Lord. Mm-hmm. Speak to some people who have great testimony of God showing up in powerful ways in their life that reminds you that you can trust the Lord. I think that's a deeper set issue that if you don't deal with that one, it'll do a lot more damage than just regarding your generosity. It'll damage. I think I made the comment yesterday. I was like, we make decisions based off how much money we can get. So, like, you pick if you have two jobs in front of you, 9 times out of 10, the average person will go, well, which one's giving me more money? Not which one will give me more time with my kids. I know guys who've been in church, and this is like dozens and dozens of guys. They've been in church, family's good, everything's working out, and then they finally get a job for an increased opportunity, maybe more money, maybe forward momentum in their career, but it's going to require them to work at least 2 or 3 Sundays a month. And they're like, it's going to be fine, though. Me and God are good. The story always goes the same way, though. Yeah. 6 months down the road, either their family's falling apart, their relationship with God is struggling, their community in the church is, deteriorating. And it's the same story, because we convinced ourselves we were so good that we don't have to actually spend that time or that trust or build that anymore, because I'm just going to pursue this thing I desire most, which is forward momentum, money, and all that kind of stuff. And so I think the trusting God part is God has to be above everything. It goes back to the whole thing about Jesus asked for everything to the rich dude, and the poor widow, the old lady, gave everything. He really asked for everything. And sometimes that means we make decisions not based off the financial benefit it's going to bring to our life. And so, I don't know if that answers it, but if you have struggle trust, if it's the church side, have the conversation. Talk to the appropriate people who can answer your questions, who can provide transparency. I mean, we did on the Vision Sunday, we outlined, this is how our budget is broken up. This is how we spend our money and our resources. So there's people that you can communicate to and help that trust be built. And then the God stuff, that's deeper, that you'll spend more time on.
I have a personal question for you.
Okay.
Have you been at or served or worked at a church that abused money?
Yes.
How did it affect you personally?
It's the question I answered earlier. Do you trust God? But
did you stay at the church?
No.
You quit because they were abusing money?
No, I didn't stay at the church. I didn't remain at the church. How would I say this?
If you're wanting to shy away because you're not wanting to badmouth someone on this podcast, I completely understand.
Yeah,
I wasn't trying to go in that direction.
Ultimately, I don't want to. I don't want to cast dispersion on the church.
That wasn't my point. I think I'm more just like people that have said like, yeah, Bobby, you don't understand. I was at a church and this thing happened. How do I get over that? You know.
So the scripture that talks about bitterness is like a root that that basically eats you alive from the inside. It's the seed in your heart, and so I think that when you go through bad experiences like that, or tough to understand experiences, when it seems so out of scale, when you go through situations like that, everyone goes through hard stuff. There has to be a thing inside of you that goes, okay, do I still trust God? Do I still trust God at His word? Or am I going to allow a bad experience with a man, with a church, with a leadership structure to taint everything I do for the rest of my life? So I can either be, the rest of my walk with God can be colored and colorized by that experience, or I can choose to move on, trust God with it, not allow the bitterness to seep down into my heart, to destroy me from the inside out, and to continue to trust God at His word. So for me, I think the thing that it did mostly is like, man will let me down. It's the story of my life. Sorry. Ooh. Man will let you down.
Yeah.
It's life. God never has. And so I think we pit a lot of things against God that's on man. And if our relationship with God can be, if we can trust and sit in that answers all the other things. I serve with guys and with men. I've served leaders, but ultimately I'm serving God no matter the situation. So yeah, I've been in some bad situations that, the long story short is the church that I was at went bankrupt a few years later. Been in some bad situations, but that's people, and the church isn't perfect, and people make mistakes. So yeah, I would move on if I felt like a church was doing something illegal, immoral, lacking integrity regarding finances. I would have the conversations. If the conversations went nowhere, or if I felt like it was still secret, like secrecy, I would push into those further. If sometimes though it's not that. Sometimes it's, oh, the church isn't doing what we shouldn't have spent money to paint that wall. Well, why not? That's just that's an opinion thing. And like maybe there should be money spent to paint the wall. But there are some things that aren't integrity issues, it's preference issues. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important for us to know how to separate those two. Some people don't care about a good sound system, and some people really care about a good sound system. It's not that one of those is right or wrong. There's probably extremes that are both wrong, but knowing to differentiate between preferences and true integrity issues, and then knowing if it is bad and you've went through all the leadership things and you've talked to the right people and you feel like there's no resolve and you're not comfortable, then it's not just I should divert my funds somewhere else. If you can't trust your funds in a place, you can't trust to have your kids there. You can't trust to have your family there. Like if you can't trust a church with your finances, you probably can't trust it in any other area.
Probably time to go.
Yeah.
I think it's really good, man. I appreciate you sharing that. I feel like I heard like 3 really important things. And the first was, not in order, but reverse order. When you're struggling, ask yourself, is this a preference or an integrity issue? Because that's 100% true. You might not have a preference for how they spent money, but this make an integrity issue. Number 2, ask the right questions. If it is an integrity issue, maybe it is time to stop supporting it and move on. But then number 3, just because you've seen people abuse in the past doesn't mean this one's abusing. And like, if we're not willing to step back out and keep walking despite what people have done, we're just going to spend the rest of our lives alone in a basement.
Yeah.
And I think those 3 things are all important. There's no simple answer. It really is unpacking a lot of stuff for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But that's what we're here for. That's the journey.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you sharing that. And yeah, it's been my journey as well. I'm just learning to, because I am such a tightwad sometimes. I can get judgmental and I say, well, no, Pete, that's a preference issue. That's not an integrity issue.
Yeah.
Them spending that money is not wrong. It's just not what you would want or whatever. Other times I'm like, no, that is wrong. And it's time for me to leave.
Yeah.
But then going to a new place and being like, well, this is a new place. Just because that happened back there doesn't mean they're doing it as well. And I have to be willing to try to trust again. I don't know. That's just a journey.
Yeah.
So if you're on it, if you're on it, like, I think all three of those things are things you start to consider. And I love just the statement, like, ask questions. I think you're available to anyone that wants to talk.
Yeah.
You might have to schedule it. You're a busy guy, but so am I.
Yeah.
We would love to help walk anyone through that journey and get to the point that you are trusting God and trusting this church if you're a part of it. So, well, cool. Awesome. So next week, you're going to wrap up this series talking about unity is our spirit. I knew that. I was just wanting to say it with
double checking. Yeah.
Unity is our spirit. So it's going to be great way to end it. And then we've got, I think, an off week and then a really cool series you're starting about truth being intention. And so March is going to be great. It's going to be Easter before we know it. And, but man, it's, appreciate it. What you're doing. If you have any, as always, we say this, like, if you ever have questions from a Sunday sermon, you can always let us know. And if there are things that you want to know more about, we can add them to dig deeper. But appreciate feedback and everything. So, yeah, we'll dive into that next week. Keep going.
All right.
Thanks, everybody. See you then.